going to give Islam problems. Get me at 170. Get me at 170.
We'll get you back on the Maccas.
Nah, look. Again, feel bad for JDM. And feel for him. Obviously, you don't get much better dudes than Jack. One of the nicest guys you'll ever meet.
I didn't plan on it, but my shuttle just got here and I saw him walk. I wanted to tell Habib and Islam both congratulations, man. What they're doing is incredible. Just won a belt, 15 pounds up. I mean, dominantly. It's just him and his team, the work they're doing and the way they're performing is incredible, man. I gotta respect it, you know?
See, now, I ain't gonna lie to you guys. I want to see Ilia Topuria versus Islam now. I want to see it even more now. Dude, Ilia versus Islam White House. Make it happen, Dana. Make it happen.
Before Islam Makhachev and Della Maddalena ever touched gloves, the entire MMA world was already in chaos. This wasn't one of those predictable title fights where everyone quietly nodded, picked the same winner, and moved on. No, this was a storm. A genuine split across media fighters, analysts, and fans who all swore they were seeing the matchup clearly, even though everyone's version of clear looked completely different. Major outlets were publishing opposite predictions within hours of each other. Some called Jack the most dangerous boxer Islam had ever faced. Others insisted Islam's championship experience would drown Jack before he ever found a rhythm. Headlines didn't match. Analysts contradicted their own colleagues, and every preview show became a battlefield of strong opinions and zero consensus. Fighters started jumping in too, and that's when things got even messier. Strikers backed Jack with full confidence, pointing to his timing, his pressure, his ability to touch people early and often. Wrestlers rolled their eyes and said the sport hadn't changed that much. Lightweight veterans warned everyone not to underestimate Islam's IQ. Welterweights argued Jack's size and speed created the perfect upset conditions. Meanwhile, fans were losing their minds online. The matchup was being called the perfect stylistic clash, the kind of fight where both men had such distinct strengths that the tiniest mistake could flip the entire outcome. Half the internet believed Jack would turn it into a boxing clinic. The other half said Islam's grappling was too heavy, too tested, too suffocating to let anything crazy happen. And underneath all the noise was one simple truth: this fight felt unpredictable. Because both men were stepping into something new, Islam into a bigger weight class, Jack into a world title spotlight he'd never experienced. People weren't just guessing who would win, they were guessing who these fighters would become under pressure. But while fans argued, the pros started speaking up. When the predictions started pouring in, one voice immediately cut through the noise: Alexander Volkanovski. If anyone understood the puzzle of Islam Makhachev, it was the man who'd gone 25 brutal minutes with him and lived to tell the tale. Volk didn't speak in hype or emotion, he spoke in formula. He spoke in blueprint. And according to him, Della Maddalena had the exact tools needed to topple the lightweight king who had just marched up to 170. Volk's message was simple: Jack has to pressure. Always. Not reckless pressure, but controlled suffocation closing distance, forcing Islam to react rather than initiate and never letting the fight settle into Islam's preferred tempo. In Volk's eyes, Jack's boxing wasn't just sharp. It was efficient, unpredictable, and dangerous from every angle. He believed Jack's footwork could make Islam hesitate on entries. He believed Jack's timing could punish Islam's level changes. And he believed that if Jack stayed in Islam's face long enough, the striking exchanges would tilt in his favor. It wasn't blind optimism. Volk genuinely saw something in Jack that reminded him of fighters who gave Islam trouble: a certain rhythm, a certain stubbornness, a willingness to keep standing even when things got messy. And after facing Islam twice, Volk knew how important that was. Islam doesn't just beat you physically, he drains your confidence. Volk believed Jack had the rare ability to refuse that drain. But as Volk broke down the fight in interviews, something subtle began to show cracks in the logic he didn't notice he was exposing. He kept saying Jack should focus on the feet, while also acknowledging Islam's striking had evolved into a real weapon. He insisted Jack shouldn't fear the takedown, while admitting Islam's control was suffocating if he got even one clean grip. Volk believed in Jack, but he was also describing a razor-thin path, a path where everything had to go right. Yet even Volk's blueprint missed one crucial detail. While Volkanovski was mapping out the perfect path for Della Maddalena, Michael Bisping approached the fight from a completely different angle. He didn't start with emotion, stylistic fantasies, or wishful thinking. He started with numbers, history, and scars, the kind of scars only a former world champion truly understands. And as he dug through the details, something shifted. At first, Bisping flirted with the idea of picking Jack. The hype was real, the boxing was smooth, the pressure style made sense, but then he stopped, took a breath, and forced himself to look at Islam Makhachev's resume without bias. 27 wins, 1 loss, 5 knockouts, 13 submissions, multi-surface danger, and a level of composure that had carried him through firefights, championship rounds, and revenge arcs against elite opponents. And that's when Bisping switched his pick. Quietly, calmly, almost reluctantly. Because when he lined up the numbers, the logic screamed one thing Islam had already proved: he could win 1,000 different ways. Jack hadn't. What pushed Bisping over the edge was Islam's consistency, his ability to adjust mid-fight, his refusal to panic in bad positions, and his habit of solving puzzle piece fighters like Jackmen with one world-class strength and an entire career built around it. Champions don't just win, champions adapt. And Bisping trusted that more than any prediction built on momentum or emotion, and in the end, his switch aged better than anyone realized. He saw something most people ignored: Islam wasn't coming to experiment at 170, he was coming to dominate. But then came the loudest belief in Jack. If Volkanovski approached the matchup with logic and Bisping approached it with experience, Israel Adesanya brought something entirely different. The perspective of a world-class striker who knows exactly what it feels like to exchange with someone who can take your head off. And the moment Izzy looked at Della Maddalena's tape, he didn't hesitate. He said it plainly: if Islam is forced to strike with Jack, he's going to get hurt. To Izzy, the danger wasn't theoretical, it was technical. Jack's accuracy was the kind of accuracy that doesn't fade under pressure. His jab didn't just land, it landed clean. His counters didn't just touch, they punished. And his ability to hit the same target 3 different ways in the same exchange made him unpredictable in the pocket, even for elite grapplers who were used to smothering chaos. Adesanya wasn't basing this on hype. He'd seen Jack spar, seen him fight, seen the way he reset after getting clipped. Jack didn't crumble, he recalculated. And that is exactly why Izzy believed the fight would eventually be forced into striking range. If Jack kept standing up, kept creating space, kept refusing to fold, Islam would have no choice but to play that game for stretches. And in those stretches, Izzy believed Jack would shine. And above everything else, Izzy trusted Jack's toughness. He talked about how many fighters lose the mental battle against Islam long before the physical fight begins. Jack wasn't wired that way. He didn't panic, he didn't overreact, and he didn't break when things got ugly. But while Izzy focused on the striking danger, others were looking at something far deeper, the kind of danger that had nothing to do with punches at all. But striking wasn't the only angle experts debated. When Henry Cejudo broke down the matchup, he didn't approach it like a fan or a hype machine. He approached it like a wrestler, a real one, someone who knows exactly what it means when a fighter starts talking about a backup plan. And that's why one simple sentence from Islam Makhachev rattled him more than anything else leading up to fight night. Islam had said it casually in an interview: if wrestling doesn't work, we're going to strike. Those 8 words set off alarms in Cejudo's mind. Because to a triple champion like Henry, that wasn't confidence. That was risk. That was danger. That was Islam admitting even for a moment that he might have to fight Della Maddalena in the one place Jack was most lethal. And Cejudo knew exactly how reckless that could become. Jack wasn't just a good boxer. He was a punishing body hunter with sharp knees, long combinations, and a style built to hurt fighters who try to stand tall and trade. Cejudo explained it bluntly: you don't strike with a guy who destroys people downstairs, splits guards with elbows, and walks forward like he's wearing armor. If Islam ended up standing in the pocket even briefly, Cejudo believed it could get disastrous in seconds. Still, even with all the concern, even with all the hesitation in his voice, Cejudo couldn't pick against Islam. The wrestling pedigree was too strong, the control positions were too reliable, and the championship instincts were too tested to ignore. Fear didn't change reality. If Islam got his hands locked, he could dictate every second of the fight. But if Cejudo felt cautious, Usman felt something even heavier: genuine conflict. And if Cejudo was cautious, Usman was conflicted. When Kamaru Usman broke down the matchup, he didn't lean on hype or highlight reels. He didn't obsess over stats or talk endlessly about technical details. Instead, he looked at something far more primal: the spirit of the fighters involved. The will behind their eyes. The way they react when the plan collapses and a fight turns into a test of pure survival. And from that angle, Usman saw a story far different from what most fans were expecting. He respected Islam's dominance, of course. The discipline, the suffocating pressure, the ability to drown opponents in slow, controlled chaos. But Usman also saw something in Jack Della Maddalena that almost no one else recognized, a stubborn, unshakable heart that refused to fade even in disasters. He mentioned fights where Jack was hurt, tired, or compromised, yet always found a way to claw himself back into control. That kind of resilience doesn't show up on stat sheets, but champions like Usman can spot it instantly. And that's why Usman insisted the fight was far closer than the betting lines or mainstream predictions suggested. He believed Jack had the hunger, the mental armor, and the refusal to fold mentality needed to make Islam uncomfortable. It wasn't about technique, it was about will. Usman had fought enough wars to know that sometimes the fighter who simply refuses to break becomes the biggest problem in the cage. Still, even with all that respect for Jack's spirit, Usman couldn't ignore the darkest part of the matchup: Islam's ground control. Not the takedowns themselves, but what happens after. The slow squeeze, the positional traps, the feeling of being smothered by someone who doesn't rush, doesn't panic, and doesn't give space back once he takes it. Usman warned that if Islam dragged Jack down early, the momentum could shift instantly and violently. But even as experts debated the wrestling threat, another split was forming, one that had nothing to do with grappling at all. But wrestling wasn't the only worry. Chael Sonnen approached this matchup from a completely different angle. While most analysts were obsessing over styles, footwork scrambles, and game plans, Chael focused on something far more elusive: timing. The timing of a fighter's career. The timing of a performance. The timing of a moment where everything just clicks in a way even the fighter can't fully explain. And that's why his breakdown of Jack Della Maddalena didn't sound like anyone else's. Chael had followed Jack since the early days, long before the spotlight, long before the title shot. He'd seen Jack win ugly win, clean win with grit, and win with precision. But nothing, absolutely nothing, impressed him more than Jack's last fight against Belal Muhammad. Chael said it plainly: that version of Jack was the best he had ever looked. The sharpest, the calmest, the most in control. It wasn't just technique, it was aura, it was presence. It was the look of a fighter performing beyond even his own expectations. But that's exactly where the mystery began, because Chael didn't know if Jack could reproduce that performance, and he didn't pretend to know. He talked about those rare nights in a fighter's career where everything aligns: the timing, the emotions, the sharpness, the instincts, and the performance becomes something almost supernatural. Something you can't bottle. Something you can't guarantee will ever show up again. In Chael's eyes, that was the Jack who earned the belt, but not necessarily the Jack who would walk into Islam Makhachev. On the other side of the cage, Chael saw Islam as the complete opposite: not a peak fighter, but a consistent one. No heaven-sent performance needed. No magical night. Islam's floor was higher than most fighters' ceilings, and that consistency made him terrifying. Meanwhile, others saw something more chaotic. While Chael Sonnen focused on timing and consistency, a completely different camp of analysts saw the matchup through a much louder, more chaotic lens. To them, this wasn't a philosophical puzzle or a battle of championship composure. This was a coming storm for Islam, powered by the rise of a new kind of striker. And no one spoke louder about it than MMA guru and Brendan Schaub. Guru didn't just praise Jack's boxing, he went deeper, right into the seams of Jack's scrambles, the tiny transitions most people miss. He brought up the Burns fight, where Jack's arm broke early, and yet he stayed composed, kept moving, and even out-scrambled a world-class grappler long enough to secure a finish. Guru wasn't impressed by brute strength, he was impressed by fluidity, by how Jack never looked lost on the ground. The natural instincts, the quick rolls, the calm reactions under pressure. In Guru's eyes, Jack wasn't just a boxer. He was a survivor, and that made him extremely dangerous against Islam. Then there was Schaub, blunt, loud, and absolute in his stance. To him, this was the clearest striker versus grappler fight in years. No illusions, no complications. Jack had the best pure boxing in the UFC. Islam had elite wrestling and suffocating top control. Schaub framed it as a simple war of wills. If Jack stopped takedowns long enough to box, he would take over. If Islam locked his hands once, the whole fight would collapse in his direction. And because Schaub believed in Jack's size, timing, and experience at welterweight, he leaned heavily toward Jack's ability to keep the fight standing. This was the essence of the Strikers Revolution analysts, who believed the sport had evolved past the old formulas. They saw Jack as the symbol of that evolution: sharp, mobile, efficient, deadly in exchanges. They believed Islam's entries would finally meet a wall he couldn't push through. But all of them, even the loudest voices, were working off a flawed premise. Because the fight wasn't decided by pure anything. All the noise, all the predictions, all the confident breakdowns, every camp missed the same thing. Islam Makhachev didn't just move up to 170. He evolved into something completely different. This wasn't a lightweight trying his luck at a bigger weight. This was a fighter stepping into a division where his frame, his power, and his timing suddenly felt natural, effortless, almost unfair. The first thing everyone overlooked was the size, not the scale weight, the functional size. Islam carried 170 like it was his true home. His shoulders looked fuller, his hips looked heavier, and when he pushed forward, he didn't look like a lightweight testing the waters. He looked like a welterweight who had finally stopped cutting himself down. And with that new size came something even more surprising, timing and accuracy sharper than they'd ever been. The improvements that started in the Volkanovski fights didn't fade, they exploded. His jab came out straighter, his counters landed cleaner, and the moment he touched Jack, you could see the difference. These weren't lightweight shots anymore. These were welterweight impacts backed by perfect mechanics. Then there was the pace. Islam didn't fight like a man adjusting to a bigger division. He fought like someone who'd been waiting for it. The pressure was smoother, the footwork was tighter, and instead of shooting desperately or hanging back cautiously, he was dictating everything. Jack couldn't get the rhythm he needed to set up his deadly boxing because Islam never let the tempo settle. Shift left, jab, step in, angle out, level feint, real shot, reset. It was a machine one Jack couldn't disrupt. The momentum people assumed Jack would create, it never even started. Islam muted it instantly, and once the fight started, everything changed. When the cage door finally shut, it took less than a minute for everyone watching, analysts, fans, even fighters who had broken down the matchup all week, to realize something was off. Islam Makhachev wasn't easing into the fight. He wasn't testing Jack's reactions or slowly downloading data. Instead, he walked forward with a level of confidence that told you he already understood how this story would end. And from that moment on, he dictated every second. Della Maddalena tried to establish his rhythm early, but Islam never let him breathe. Every time Jack tried to set his feet, Islam took a half step inside the pocket, forcing Jack to reset. Every time Jack tried to slip or roll, Islam cut an angle that made the target disappear. And when Jack finally tried to plant and fire, Islam's timing beat him to the punch, literally. It wasn't speed, it wasn't power, it was precision layered with perfect positioning. What shocked the MMA world wasn't just Islam's striking, it was how effortlessly he blended it with his grappling threats. A jab turned into a level change. A feint became a step in knee. A pressure step became a clinch. Jack never had space for a clean pivot, never got the pocket exchanges he thrives in, and never forced the wild scrambles everyone expected. Every defensive reaction Jack used was smothered by Islam's next layer. The boxing that had carried Jack to a world title, it never even came alive. Islam didn't negate it, he disconnected it. He made sure Jack was always reacting, never initiating, never dictating the tempo required for his combinations to land. The striker versus grappler war people expected never materialized. Islam turned it into a one-sided tactical lesson, and when it was over, one question echoed through the MMA world: so which expert was closest? When the dust settled and reality set in, the MMA world immediately turned its attention back to the predictions. Not out of pettiness, but because this fight exposed just how differently experts interpret the same matchup. And when you put them all side by side, it became clear whose analysis truly aged the best. First, the loudest voices, the pure striker analysts. They were the ones who insisted Jack's boxing would overwhelm Islam, that the pressure would break him, that Islam would be forced into wild scrambles he couldn't control. But as the fight unfolded, that entire side of the prediction table fell apart. Jack never built momentum, never created chaos, and never got his rhythm. These predictions weren't just off, they never had a chance to materialize. Then there were the optimistic believers, the fighters who saw heart toughness and dangerous moments for Islam. Adesanya, Guru Schaub. Their takes were rooted in respect for Jack's power and creativity, but structurally they misread Islam's evolution. They expected a firefight. Islam delivered a clinic. On the opposite end were the technical realists, Cejudo and Usman. Cejudo warned that if Islam chose to strike, things could go wrong quickly. He was right to fear that possibility, even if the outcome proved Islam's striking was far sharper than expected. Usman, meanwhile, saw the fight as closer than the public believed and highlighted the ground control as the real danger. He wasn't wrong. Islam's ability to dictate every phase of the fight validated that breakdown more than most people realized. But the prediction that aged the best came from Michael Bisping. He started with curiosity about Jack, and then switched calmly and logically after analyzing Islam's resume consistency and championship adaptability. Bisping didn't fall for momentum or emotions. He trusted experience, structure, and history, and that put him closest to calling the reality we all witnessed. Some predictions weren't just off, they lived in a different universe. The Jack by knockout crowd. The Islam will panic on the feet takes. the pure striking battle fantasies. None of it reflected what actually happened. And now the real question? As soon as Islam Makhachev's hand was raised, the entire narrative around the welterweight division shifted. There was no adjustment period, no debate, no easing into the conversation. Islam didn't just win, he carved his name into a new weight class with the confidence of someone who wasn't testing the waters but claiming territory. And before the commentators could even catch their breath, Islam pointed straight at his next target, Ilia Topuria. That call-out didn't just spark hype, it sparked fear. Because now fans were finally processing what they had just seen. This wasn't Islam, the lightweight champion, trying something new. This was Islam at 170, looking bigger, sharper, calmer, and even more dangerous. The precision he showed, that was welterweight power behind it. The control he displayed, that was a larger frame, applying pressure that opponents won't easily shake off. Suddenly, the idea of him facing Ilia, a fighter with nuclear timing and explosive bursts, felt less like fantasy and more like a legitimate collision course. And fans realized something else. Islam's win didn't just prove he could hang at welterweight, it proved he could run it. Della Maddalena wasn't a tune-up fight. He was the champion. The man who dismantled Bilal Muhammad. The guy many believed represented the new era. And Islam didn't just beat him, he neutralized him, silenced his strengths, took away every path Jack had built his career on. Now the legacy conversation is impossible to avoid. Islam is flirting with something rare greatness across divisions. Control at lightweight, domination at welterweight. And if the Ilia fight happens, it becomes a battle not just for a title, but for the future shape of two divisions. Because if this is Islam easing into 170, who survives when he finally pushes to full throttle?